Yes, I take my cue from a previous speaker who said that gambling, counselling, is the major weapon against gambling. So, I've developed, in working with clients, I've developed my own model, which it's an integrated model. And it's based on a social work strength approach and incorporates quite a few other things in it, which the major thing we're going to talk about is neuroplasticity. And we'll just tell you what that is about in a minute. So this is the model, and you'll notice that here, as the previous speaker has said, it's hard work. We're asking clients to work and do the work. And no client moves upwards towards in the journey of recovery without doing the hard work. And I think we do our clients a disservice if we do not tell them that, okay, it's going to be hard, but I think you can do it. It's all right, motivational interviewing, you know, we talk about informing clients from their own language, but from stepping outside and saying, hey, you've got an addiction, you need to work at it, and it's going to be hard, there are going to be problems, but you know, you've got the capacity to do it. Why a model? Because we need a rudder and a compass to guide us into what we are actually doing. Why a model? Because in counselling, no one practice, how much evidence-based it is sufficient to satisfy our client needs. They're individual and various, and counselling is as much as an art as much as a science. It depends on relationships. So what is addiction? We're dealing with addiction. What is it? Is it a moral question, a disease, a genetic problem, a learned behaviour, social problem, a brain dysfunction, or a chemical balance? Well, you can pay money and take your choice. In fact, it's a bit of all of those things. Is it a moral issue? And I like that quote from the 1920s, perversion of instinct of adventure and enterprise. Some of our clients do have a lot of life about them. They like to embark on enterprises, but it is the quickest way to ruin, I'm told. Or is gambling, modern language, a dysfunctional way of fulfilling a perceived need which leads to impulsive and harmful behaviours? So moving from, you know, there's a whole range of definitions you can have about addiction. But the DSM-5 says now that gambling is a real addiction. It's not just a habit, it's not an impulse behaviour, it is a real addiction. We tend to forget that. And listening to previous speakers, you know, we're sort of getting away from the idea of healing for an addiction itself. All addictions share the same brain circuits and brain chemicals. So gambling is like any other addiction, like alcoholism, drug taking. It has the same, all addictions share the same characteristics in terms of the neurology. The aim of addiction on a biochemical level is to create an altered physiological state of the brain. So what we're talking about is something that's tangible, it's real. In some ways, addiction is a do-it-yourself job. Whether it's genetic or otherwise determined, a person has to learn to be an addict by indulging with the addictive agent. So develop the neurological system of addiction. And it's all to do with the pleasure-reward system in our brains. Thinking about, is it genetic or learned? It's a very hard distinction because learning actually begins in the womb. So we're not altogether responsible for what we have learned. So, and learning develops through the pleasure-reward system, initially in attachment, firstly in the womb, initially in attachment, and depends on what is assimilated. So learnings develop on top of other learnings, and you develop a superstructure of them. So what starts in the womb has effects later on, influences what happens. Oh, we've gone. Here we are. So here we are. Gambling is an addiction. There are other addictions that don't necessarily involve substances. It's a learned behaviour, but many of the drivers could facilitate its development, including moral, genetic and social factors. In our counselling, we face all the above issues. And to miss out on how addiction is learned and develops is to leave out strategies for the client to recover. 2 questions. Do any changes in the functioning of the brain occur when addiction develops? And if so, what then is addiction? And this brings us to the subject of neuroplasticity. I think in the last 15 to 20 years, we've learned more about the brain than we ever have in the previous millennia. It's one of the new developing sciences. We're learning every day more about what the brain is capable of. We used to think of the brain as given. You know, you had certain makeup. It was like a machine. It was there. You've got it. You can't do anything to it. It's mechanical. But no, it's not like that. It can be changed. The brain develops with your learning. So you can influence the way it is learned. So it's not hardwired. And okay, you were born with a certain capacity, but the brain is not unchangeable. So this is what plasticity means. In the long run, we shape our lives and we shape ourselves. The process never ends until we die, and the choices we make are ultimately our own responsibility. So we can say to an addict or someone who's got an addiction, okay, the responsibility for you having an addiction is not altogether yours. So you can take away the guilt, part of the shame, but you can say, okay, now you know it's your responsibility. What are you going to do with it? So I think that is empowering for clients to know that and to move on, to be able to move on from that. But to see addiction as the only problem is to leave intact the context that triggered the addiction in the first place. There are few things that can be done to beat addiction, and addicts have to change many of their parts to carry them out. Yet understanding of the brain helps us to understand what those things are and how and why they work. My mother had a heart attack and she had a dye test, and it showed that some of the arteries were blocked. So she took the doctor's advice and she did everything she could, new diets and everything, And 6 months later, she had another dye test, and it showed that there were new pathways, new veins formed, and the blockage, the veins had circumvented it. And you can ask people who've had heart attacks or heart problems, and they can tell you everything about their heart that they need to know. You know, the chambers, the aorta, and what have you. But do we know about our own brains? Do we know much about them? Can anyone sort of say what the various, or name any parts of the brain? But so basically, and you can talk to clients about this, they understand that there are 3 basic parts of the brain. You know, the non-mammalian and here the reptilian part. The reptilian contains automatic functions. The midbrain here, this area has the limbic system where emotions, memory are seated, and that's where the pleasure reward system is contained. So this is the pleasure reward system, and I must emphasise I'm not a neuroscientist, but we can understand a very simplistic but scientifically sound picture of what happens. So here's the limbic system. This is this area of the brain is the thinking part. This is the automatic part where it controls your breathing and heartbeat, and the midbrain where the pleasure and reward system is set off in this area where dopamine is released from this part here, which is medial forebrain bundle. Yeah. Okay. Here's a bit more of the, so showing the NA, the VTA, that's where the dopamine comes from. And it spreads around this area, and it, what happens is dopamine is the neurochemical which makes you want something. So it's the seeking, you know, it's looking forward to something happening. And when it excites other areas of the brain, other neurochemicals like endorphins are produced, which are opiates, and these circulate around and reinforce each other, and that's the pleasure reward system. Yeah. So here's the dopamine pathways, serotonin pathways. So it's good to actually just see the parts and see what is happening in there. This is the prefrontal cortex where you do your thinking, and there's the seat of the emotions, which is the amygdala, and the memory, which is the hippocampus. So when a person decides, say, to gamble, they've made a decision here, what happens is this part of the brain, the ACC, it's the area of the brain that makes instant decisions. So if you see a tiger coming, you run. You don't have to think about it. So if you've said yes to gambling, okay, it's a good thing. You've been told it. This area of the brain sees inputs coming in, stimuli, which, okay, yes, gamble. So there's the dopamine system is activated, and that activates other areas, the memory, the emotions. Memories of past good gambling experiences. You remember the wins, but you don't remember the losses. So you remember the emotion, or you try to cut out the emotion. So that's all part of that pleasure-reward cycle that's stimulated by the production of dopamine. So memory emotions are tied up in this circle of addiction. This is part of the limbic system, is the midbrain, which is the area where the brain responds to fear, sex, and self-preservation. So that's the system which is activated. So an addiction is like could be a running from pain, a running from bad experiences, or it could be just something that's a habit that's developed that's pleasurable. So that's just prefrontal cortex. They're some of the major players in the brain. Glutamate's another important chemical which stimulates the brain, excites the VTA. So you can see there's a lot going on, and I could go on and have a neurological sort of lecture about the whole thing, but that's not what we're here to do. There's some more slides showing what's the amygdala, somewhere here. But the main players are this thinking area, the orbital frontal cortex, and this area is called the striatum, the centre of excited seeking, we could call it, where the pleasure-reward pathways are formed. So we could look at addiction as a neural mistake. The brain has made an error in assigning meaning to an addictive agent. So looking at gambling may represent a flight from bad thoughts, from bad memories, or it could be gambling just could be a meaning of a good time, and that gets stored in the brain. And so the brain has made an error in assigning meaning to the gambling, the drinking, or whatever the addiction is. So the brain has condensed the individual's need into a simple symbol that stands for real needs. Those needs may have been unable for the individual at the time to meet. The addictive brain still has plasticity though. So you can see that how addiction develops as a habit, the pleasure-reward centre system is put into action, the neurological pathways that are formed, I tell clients they become highways. They're not just pathways, and they're indelibly printed in the brain, and they stay there forever. And because the habit has become an addiction, the brain says, I will meet the individual's need by indulging in the addictive agent. So coming back to our definition, addiction is a dysfunctional way of trying to meet a real need. The addict says, I need a drink or gamble, whatever the addiction is, when in fact they may have been feeling something else, like grief, hunger, hurt, force, or ashamed. So you can see how that relates to relapse prevention. I mean, we're talking about, with a client about, hey, what are you actually feeling? Are you feeling, if you're feeling like you want to gamble, is it because you're feeling one of these things? And often shame is the overriding issue. We hear, heal the shame, heal the addiction. The cravings come when the need is felt. Wanting and liking are two different things because the brain has been changed. It has become oversensitized to an addictive agent through the pleasure-reward system, and also tolerance has developed, meaning larger doses of the addictive agent are needed to produce the desired effect. The pleasure-reward cycle in the brain needs to actually be more stimulated and more stimulated to have the same effect. So you've got two sides of the same coin. It's like a vice, isn't it? It's become oversensitized on one hand, but tolerant on the other hand. So this is Professor Salmon's neural circuitry of addiction, which I couldn't understand. And I said to him, "Oh, that's quite complex." But it follows. It's the same. It's the same as those previous slides. Really, there's the dopamine from the VTA going to the prefrontal cortex, going through the amygdala, this area, and it's a reinforcing cycle. That's a functional circuitry of addiction from the same person. So I thought his diagrams were a bit complex, but he thought mine were too. Obviously, it's inappropriate to lecture clients on neurology, but the basic mechanisms of addiction and healing can be easily shown with potentially powerful outcomes. Understanding more about addictions, taking away fault, giving hope for recovery, but also giving power back to the client. If you say to clients it's going to be hard work, but you can do it, then when a relapse happens, it's not the end of the world. It's just part of the process. And this is a more complex example of work I've done with a client. All I've done is really just talk about the cortex. Person's got a brain. He's given the okay for his brain to say yes to the gambling. It's started up this pleasure-reward cycle in the brain. The neurological circuits have become flaming highways, and he's been unable to control it. If it wasn't an addiction, he'd be able to stop. That's sort of, because it's an addiction, he can't stop gambling. If he could stop, it probably wouldn't be an addiction. And I know there is, addiction is probably a continuum, but most of the clients I see, they score fairly highly in terms of having an addiction. And they agree, they have an addiction, they can't control, there are times where they can't control their gambling. So it becomes an automatic sort of function. As soon as a person sees or feels the bells, the lights, the escape, one of my clients opening the fridge, the noise that the fridge made her think about gambling because it related to the noise and the ding dong of the machines. So the stimulus goes straight into this area. It makes an instant decision, yes, gamble. So what can a client do if they can't control their gambling? And I tell clients perhaps, you know, if you come up against a brick wall, you're not going to fight your way through it, you're going to go round it, aren't you? So you need to think and change this area of the brain so you're thinking and saying no to gambling altogether. Because as we said before, the neurological pathways will stay there forever. But what you can do is that you can say no to the gambling, but you need to say yes to all sorts of other things that give you pleasure and give you reward. And in that way, you can develop new neurological pathways which are more pleasurable, more stimulating, and more enduring. So, okay, we're telling the clients there's no cure for gambling, but there's healing. And it fits with their experience of NA, GA, and it fits with their experience as well. Okay, so, okay. Right, we'll flick through. There's just more slides of... So this is really what happens. The non-addictive brain, you have control. The addicted brain, there's no control. It's gone, or it's diminished. So these are unsolicited comments from clients who've been just told a simple explanation of what happens to their pleasure reward cycle. Very helpful to understand what I should do. It's a turning point. Knowing why has definitely helped. Helps me to understand what's going on, makes me realise I need a plan. Recovery, it's hard work, involves change, it's a lifetime commitment. So we're telling clients this so that they are not, so that they know what they're in for. Healing occurs in the sacred place within us all. And if we don't know what's going on, how can we actually prepare successfully for a battle against addiction? Yeah, so the recovery is developing new reward pathways. Fill your life with meanings rich enough at least to compete with, if not defeat, the well-worn synapses of imagined value. Okay?